I'm Andrew, and welcome back to Community Design Review, where we take a look at some of this week's best designs from the custom magic community. Our first shout out this week is Goblin Florist. It costs 2 and a red for a creature, Goblin, that's a 1/2 with tap. Create a colorless artifact token named Black Lotus. The token has no abilities. Okay, so this is continuing the Goblins theme of just being really bad at their job. So here it gives you a Black Lotus that doesn't actually do anything. So not even necessarily bad. Yeah, 1/2 for 3 is not good, but if it can pump out an artifact token every turn, this could go in an artifact deck and still probably be pretty decent. Next up, we have RHYSTIC Study. It costs 3 and a blue for an enchantment that says, whenever an ability of a permanent named RHYSTIC Study causes an opponent to draw a card, you may draw 2 cards unless that player pays 2. So this is just kind of a way to punish players who are running RHYSTIC Study, because it's just kind of annoying every time you cast a spell to have to be reminded to pay 1 mana or let the opponent draw a card. And so this way you're like, well, now I don't have to pay, because if they draw a card, then they have to let me draw 2 or pay 2 mana. So it's a funny design. Utility, it's very narrow. You have to know that your opponent is running RHYSTIC Study and that they're going to play it. If you draw this and they don't have it, not very helpful, but it is a funny concept. And our last shout out this week is TRUCK-KUN. It is a legendary artifact vehicle for 4. It's a 6/6 with TRUCK-KUN must be blocked if able. If a creature dealt damage by TRUCK-KUN would dies this turn, capital target player in a silver bordered game you can see from your seat gains control of said creature with all damage removed from it instead. And crew 3. Okay, I'm thinking this is a reference to some anime thing that I do not understand. Let's take a look at the comments. All right, so one long trip to TV tropes later. It's just a reference to isekai, which is a story format in which a character is basically summoned to another world and doesn't necessarily have a way to get back. So the idea here is that the truck is going to run over a character, and instead of dying, they're going to appear in another world, which is kind of a cool idea. And I do like that it sort of used the same formatting as Gimme 5, where it's talking about other silver bordered games. Our number 5 card this week is Relive the Past. It costs X black-red for a sorcery. Ooh, Rakdos's Return. Exile X target cards from your graveyard. Until your next turn, you may play those cards. Exile, relive the past. Interesting. So it doesn't say until the end of your next turn, which means you've got to play those cards pretty much right away, using whatever mana you have available to you. So this seems to be more of a late game card. When you have like 10 mana available, you can cast it for 5, have 3 cards. Maybe one of them's a land. So now you have 6 mana remaining to cast 2 spells, which is good, but really expensive. Number 4 this week is Rummage and Loot. It is a split card where 1/2 Rummage costs a red for an instant that says discard a card, then draw a card. And the blue side is Loot, costs blue for an instant that says draw a card and then discard a card. Okay, and it's got Fuse. Look, either half of this card, just cast by itself, is pretty bad, because while rummaging is good and looting is good, there's a hidden cost here, which is that you're also spending the card Rummage and Loot in order to get that effect. So if you play Rummage or Loot, you're actually discarding 2 cards to draw 1 card, and that's not a good rate. So let's see what happens if you play both. It costs 2 mana, discard a card, then draw a card, then draw a card, then discard a card. So you're still down a card, because you're still drawing 2, discarding 2, and playing Rummage/Loot. So this is pretty situationally helpful. I mean, I guess I would run it in a deck where I'm drawing too many cards anyway, so I don't necessarily need numerous cards. I need specific cards. And it definitely seems like it could be helpful in that regard. I mean, Faithless Looting is a pretty good card that is also card disadvantage. I mean, there's a reason it was banned in Modern. Number 3 this week is Plutocracy. It costs white-black for an enchantment that says the player who controls the most treasure is the Monarch. Interesting. So this changes the way the Monarch mechanic works. So you're not going to become the Monarch by simply hitting the person who is the Monarch. So this makes some more sense, but it's also a little hard to compete with. The thing about the Monarch mechanic is everybody, well, almost everybody has creatures, which means generally people have some way of becoming Monarch, which balances the mechanic. However, not everybody has some way of making treasures. So I kind of like the idea here, but I'm not necessarily sure that I like the execution, especially considering that this is a representation of pretty much everything that's wrong in our world. Moving on to number 2, we have Witness to the Sun. It is a 1/2 creature vampire cleric for white. Players can't activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities. Oh, okay. So this is a reference to the Immortal Sun, and honestly, that seems like a perfectly fine white hate bear. Except it's not a bear, so that's really my only gripe about it. Everybody knows that white prison decks don't need a curve, they need a wall. Honestly, this seems like a pretty reasonable effect. It seems fair, and it's a pretty cool design. And our number 1 card for this week is Tag. It costs red for an instant that says Tag target opponent. Okay, I'm getting the feel that maybe this should be silver bordered. They become it. As long as a player is it, creatures they control have haste and are goaded. Whenever a creature it controls deals combat damage to a player, the defending player becomes it. I'm not sure how this works with goaded. Does this still mean that those creatures cannot attack you because Tag is your spell? Clarification in the comments. The you in the part of goad that states attack a player other than you, if able, should refer to the player who made that player it. That makes sense. No tag backs. While I do believe that makes sense as the intention, I'm not necessarily sure that that is mechanically coming across. But this is an interesting idea. Sort of like the Monarch, but instead of a good effect, it's a bad effect. Well, it's not just bad. It gives your creatures haste, so that's nice. I guess if you're playing an aggressive deck. This is a really cool idea. It could be fun. I'm not necessarily sure that I would want to play with this every game. You can't stop it, you know? Once you're goaded, you have to attack and try and hit somebody else. And if you can't, your creatures will die. Well, then I guess that sort of stops the being it thing. But you'll never want to play creatures again, right? It's going to lock you out of playing anything if you don't have somebody to attack. But if you can't hit somebody, then they become it and they suffer the same problem. And while that's interesting, it's not necessarily how I like to play the game. So this is a cool idea. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and submit your own designs to the Custom Magic subreddit. We'll be back next Tuesday.